I'm sure if you all get theory lectures later, you'll hear much more about this. But the negative's job is to test the affirmative, and they can be able to do that for multiple different things. So you can be like, not only would the economy be, or like, not only would the midterms be okay now, right? The Dems win now, and the app makes the Republicans win, that would be bad. But also, you know, at a more general level, the app is complicit in a structure of citizenship, which is evil, right? So they're not directly contradictory, but they don't really go together well for one. There are like a few places where you can oftentimes find disadvantages that are consistent with critique reading, but more often than not, you'll have to choose later in the debate. Yeah?
And would it be wise to run a cascade with the
Right, and in some instances, your disad is directly contradictory to your critique, and you do not want to read them in the same one and see. So if you're like, the economy is going to do real well right now, and the app collapses the economy, and if the economy collapses, that would cause war. And then the next sheet, you're like, the app saves the economy, and that means that they're capitalist, and capitalism is super evil, we should not do capitalism anymore. You're going to have a problem there, right? Because either the affirmative collapses the economy, which would collapse capitalism and solves your capitalism pay, right? Or if the economy were to collapse because of the alternative, that would cause a war. Either way, you're in a bad position. So you want to make sure that you're not reading directly contradictory positions as well. That's a great point. Yeah?
Just in theory, I'm not sure you want to, but could you link to our impact term?
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we get to answering the K. But yeah, good idea. So you need to have an alternative to generate uniqueness for the impact of the critique, right? Which means that you need a reason why the alternative, or a reason why the impact of the critique will not continue in the status quo. And the only way to do that is by proposing an alternative. You said, this bad thing's happening, we should do something else. Does anyone have any questions about that concept? I know it's very tricky, and if you don't understand it perfectly right now, that's totally fine. Just know that instead of uniqueness, Ks have alternatives, which are kind of like contradictions. They're advocacies. Like, we should do this thing. All right, in the last section, framework. Some people will tell you you should put framework in the 1NC. Some people will tell you you should put it in the 2NC. In my opinion, it depends on what critique you're making and how much you need to win framework in order to win the critique. So, you know, it could be in the 1C, could be in the 2NC. But framework is, like I was saying earlier, a system of evaluation, of determining what value we should have for different things. It's how the judge assigns that value to each side's advocacy, right? So do we evaluate each advocacy based off of its political efficacy, based off of its ability to get things done in the world? Do we evaluate it based off of its ethicality, right? Do we evaluate advocacies based off of whether they're ethical? Do we evaluate them based off of epistemology, about how they produced the knowledge that got them to the conclusion that the app was a good idea? Right? There are a lot of different frameworks that you can utilize for evaluating the debate. Traditionally, and when I say traditionally, like in the past, when you're doing, you know, like plan, counter-plan, disad debates, judges use cost-benefit policy analysis. Does anyone know what cost-benefit analysis is? I haven't heard from. Nothing why you sure? Do you know what cost-benefit analysis is? Can you be a little louder? Exactly. So that you weigh the costs or the positive, or well, costs and negatives. You weigh the benefits, right? The good things that come from the plan versus the costs, the bad things that occur. So you weigh the advantage against the disadvantage, right? And that's the traditional way to, that's the traditional framework for the debate, is that we look at a policy and we're like, what are the costs of doing this policy, whether that be a disadvantage or a counterplan that's opportunity cost to the plan, versus the benefits, the advantages to the plan, the good things that would happen if you were to do the plan or the permutation. So traditionally, judges use cost-benefit policy analysis. In most critique debates, you don't. You want to say that we should not use that particular type of debate, right? Because it's very popular, right? If the act gets up and is like, you know, we should just pass the DREAM Act because it's really screwed up the way that we treat immigrants in the status quo, and it would be ethical to pass the DREAM Act, right? that's a really powerful argument against a lot of critiques that are like, yeah, but you had a kind of messed up understanding what citizenship means, right? And they could be like, yeah, but like, if you vote affirmative, that's the equivalent of stopping all these people from being deported. That's going to be a hard impact for your beat. But if you can make the debate about the epistemology, right, that's not about whether or not the DREAM Act is a good idea, right, but it's about how we justify the DREAM Act and what methods we use to create that knowledge in the first place, then you're in a much better position as a critical team to win the debate. So, and then, yeah, there are a huge variety of potential evaluation systems. I listed a few of them earlier, but all those different categories of critiques are also different categories of evaluation. And you can have much more general frameworks as well, right? So you can be like, the framework for the debate is that the judge should evaluate the ethical and rhetorical assumptions of the act, of the 1AC. Right, that's super broad and can include all of the things that we've been talking about, right? Or you can be like, the judge should evaluate the language choices of each team. That's a very specific framework, and that means that the critique you're reading is very specific to language, right? So there's definitely a huge variety, lots of different options, and usually you'll find these types of framework arguments in your literature base. So when you're cutting and reading the evidence for a critique, when you're producing that file, those authors will suggest different evaluative systems to use to determine value. Real quick, arcs that make me sad, if you're the king. Saying the phrase role of the ballot, or the phrase role of the judge. This is kind of leftover from when Keynes were first introduced to debate. It doesn't make much sense. I think that these arguments should be incorporated in your framework ballot, or in your framework argument, that the framework argument should provide the mechanism by which the judge evaluates the debate. Right? Usually you'll hear teams going to be like, the role of the judge is to vote for the team that best challenges capitalism. Well, obviously the team that read the capitalism case is going to be the team that best challenged capitalism, right? Or the role of the ballot is to signify something or not. The role of the ballot is to determine who wins and who loses. Like, that's the only role of the ballot, in my opinion. It doesn't do anything else, just wins and loses. The judge, right? The role of the judge is bad because it's like the judge doesn't become a critic. They don't become a policymaker when they make a decision. The judge is who's ever judging in the back of the debate. And their role is to decide who wins and who loses. Right? So I think that the role of the ballot and the role of the judge arguments give the judge and the ballot like artificial kind of credibility and artificial authority. The judge only makes a provisional decision about who wins the debate. Instead, you should be like, the way that you should determine which arguments matter more than other arguments, the way that you should assign value to arguments is through our framework arguments. And I think that that accomplishes the goals of both of these things without being annoying. However, if you're debating someone and they make these arguments, that this is not a widespread consensus about these arguments, and you still need to address them directly if you're debating them. If you are reading the K, it is my opinion that these arguments make me sad. So read them if you want, if you don't, whatever. All right, so we have a little bit of time, so I'm going to go really quick through how to answer the K, right? Someone read a K against you. What do? Go postal! Woo! So, no, not that postal. So, if you've noticed, we have a lot of acronyms in debates for various things. If you remember, when you're debating a K to go postal, then you will be able to remember to make all the arguments that you need to. So it's an acronym. The P stands for permutation, which you heard about in the counterpoint seminar last night. The O stands for offense, which is link or impact turning the criticism. The S stands for solvency. Does the alternative solve the affirmative's harms? And does the alternative solve the critique? Is the alternative proposed strong enough to overcome the status quo? Solvency. T, theory. Traditionally, when people say theory in postal, they're referring to like a conditionality bad argument, right? A debate theory argument. But in its more modern instantiation, I would argue that the theory in postal should be about addressing the theory of the criticism. So if you're debating the citizenship game, you need to have an argument about the theory of the state of exception. So if you can see their theory, then it's going to be difficult for you to win the debate, because they can be like, listen, they this theory about how the state operates is true. It's only a question if we can prove if the app does that or not, right? And you're going to be way behind. So you need to answer the theory. A, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. A, alternative. You need to say that the alternative is a bad idea, right? Just like the app is, just like you say the counterplan, not a good idea, it's a bad idea. The alternative, bad idea. Socialism, the transition to socialism, could be pretty bad. If you get rid of the state, probably not that great. Huh? Well, a socialism alternative would be the impact cave. There's a lot of different cases where the alternative to get rid of the state. And then L is link. You deny the link. You're like, hey, we're not that, like, we didn't do anything that bad. Like, you know, you talk about capitalism, we just said that it would be pretty cool if, you know, dreamers didn't get deported and maybe they'll have an effect on the economy. We weren't like, hey, we should go and, you know, exploit all these workers and pay them nothing and have no safety things or whatever. You deny the link. So perm. The perm is a little different in K. There's a few differences between the permutation in K versus the counterclaim. Remember the definition of a perm, which is all of the act and all or parts of the counterclaim, or in this case, alternative. The difference between counterclaim debates and K debates is that the phrase all of the act becomes important, because does that mean that the affirmative has to defend every word that they've said in the 1AC? Does it mean that they only have to defend the plan and whether or not the plan's a good idea? These are all questions that are up for debate on the permutation that makes it distinct from the counterclaim. Can the affirmative sever a particular representation or assumption of the 1AC and only defend the plan? It's up for debate. If you're at, that's probably an argument you might want to make. If you're neg, you want to say no, they're responsible for those things. So that's the main difference in permutation debating for the K, is that when we say all of the act, it's not just all, it doesn't have to be just the plan, right? It can be all the other parts as well. And that's a debate about whether or not those other parts are important. Offense, so you can do a link term permutation strategy. So let's say that you read the Dream Act app and you only read and you read like the ethics contention in the 1AC, right? Even if you read other contentions. And the next thing gets up and they're like, citizenship K, you have some messed up understandings of what citizenship is. You can go for a link term strategy, which is like, actually, we don't have, our conception of citizenship is substantially better than what the status quo is because it doesn't deport dreamers, and that's you know, an instantiation of the violence you're talking about that we could end. So we should go for the permutation, which has those kind of critical perspectives on citizenship, but also in the meantime utilizes the law to make sure that dreamers don't get deported, and that's good. That we should you know, not deport dreamers, right? Or you can go for the impact term. Let's say that you really want to go for the military argument on the Dream Act, right? You'd be like, yeah, this citizenship stuff, super interesting, but, you know, hardline, the way that we have citizenship right now is totally fine, and the military is necessary for global peace. So if we were to disrupt how citizenship operates, then we would open ourselves up to a ton of security concerns, and stop looking at your phone back there, and even look up. I see you. I see what's happening. So you can link turn or impact turn the K. You'd be like, actually, you know, the system that you're describing, not so bad. Now there are some Ks that you should not ever impact turn, right? So you should not be like racism is good. It's not an argument you should ever make. Right? It's not a joke. You should not laugh. You should not say that. People have said that before. It's terrible. Right? But you can say capitalism is good, because there's, you know, a lot of arguments of like capitalism may be good. You should probably not say settler colonialism is good. But you can say that anarchy is bad, or eliminating the state is bad, right? So just be careful when you're impact turning that you're not saying anything that you would find yourself morally reprehensible. Okay, solvency. So I talked about this earlier. There are two parts of solvency. Can the alternative solve the act, right? So can the alternative solve the problems that the act describes about the economy, about the military, or about ethics? And can the alternative solve the K? You know, the alternative citizenship K is about curriculum. You know, is that enough of, you know, is a curricular intervention saying that we should include this perspective in debate enough to change enough people's understanding of citizenship to solve the impact, right? Debatably, no. Debatably, there will be very little effect on the alternative, and it might not solve the K, even the K. Certainly might not solve the act. In theory, I talked about this. Traditionally, it meant debate theory like conditionality or bad alt's bad, which are fine arguments to make. You should still be making them as well. But it also means that you should be answering the theoretical underpinnings of what the critique says. If someone says acro-pessimism and they read some Wilderson cards, and you don't have an answer to the argument that blackness exists in a state of social death, you're going to lose that debate regardless of any other argument that you make. So you have to answer the theoretical underpinnings of the case. So yeah, if you're hitting a citizen case, you should challenge the argument that the state defines sovereignty via the state of exception. Or you should challenge the argument that the state utilizes biopolitics for nefarious ends, etc. Finally, the alternative, which is bad, but you just say a reason why the alt might be bad. Ending the state, maybe not so great. What happens to all the nuclear weapons if the state's no longer there, right? What happens to the military and all the weapons they have if the state just ceases to exist? Probably some real bad stuff. So maybe it's not a great idea to end the state. You can also make arguments about the over-focus of the alternative. Remember how in the beginning of the lecture, critiques are iterative, they're ongoing, and they're constant? Right? A lot of people argue that this is a detriment to critiques because it means we never reach a point where we feel that we have enough to act. So if we over-focus on things like ontology and epistemology, we're constantly trying to figure out how we came to know things, right? We miss the opportunity to act to stop deportations right now. So even if the epistemology or ontology of the act isn't perfect, we should take the opportunity to end that instance of material violence. And there's a political theory called pragmatism that you can look up and do more research on. We'll question you in just a second. And then finally, the link. You say that there's no link, the act doesn't uniquely cause the impact, right? The DREAM Act is not the final straw that's going to make or break capitalism. Capitalism is probably going to be there regardless of whether or not the DREAM Act passes, right? So the act doesn't uniquely cause the impact. And you should also point out discrepancies between what their link evidence is talking about and what their impact evidence is arguing. So if their link evidence is like, the act has this understanding of citizenship, it's kind of based on some colonialism stuff, and it's a little racist, and their impact's like, we invade random places and murder a lot of people. It's like there might be a connection between those two things, but it's not apparent what that connection is. And they have to make that connection. Don't let me get away from it. And then finally, and importantly, you need to control your app. Don't let them describe your app as something that it's not. If your app is a socialist policy, if you went up and you were like, we should pass the DREAM Act because it's the ethical thing to do, and that's the only thing you said, don't let them get up there and be like, the app is a bunch of capitalist shills, and all they want to do is exploit these immigrant workers. You're like, no, our app is not about that. The only thing that we said was that it's unethical for us to deport dreamers, and we should stop it. So don't let the negative team redefine what your affirmative is. As the affirmative team, you should always be in control of what your app is and how it's described to the judge, what the judge thinks your app does. Okay, so we have a few quick minutes for questions. And we have one. Well, the impact term doesn't necessarily mean that the alt is bad, so you can say capitalism is good, right? But you can also say that the transition to communism would be bad for reasons independent of capitalism being good. Like it would just be a violent transition, right? So you can both say that the thing that they said was bad is good, and also you can say that the way that they proposed to resolve the problem is bad. So additionally, let's say you're going for a link term strategy, you can also be like, the alternative is counterproductive to challenging capitalism because revolutions don't work, we need reforms, right? So, yeah. So does that answer your question? All right, any other last minute questions? Yeah.
Wait, what was pragmatism?
Pragmatism? Pragmatism is the political theory that even if we don't have the perfect knowledge about something, we should still act to end violence if we have the opportunity. We should be pragmatic in our considerations. We should try and do things that are realistic goals instead of setting lofty ideals. Yeah.
So the net is like, hey, you're supporting a socialist society. Could you attack the link and also be like socialism good or not?
You could say that the act isn't the kind of most important thing that's going to determine the future of socialism, but you cannot say both that the act decreases socialism and that socialism is good. Right? It's just like I just said, you can't link and impact it. So you don't want to say that, or if they're reading the capitalism case, you don't want to say that the act decreases capitalism and that capitalism is good. So you can see both those arguments. Yeah. someone's doing a traditional candidate and hierarchy that contradict one another, that is more of a question about debate theory than about the critique. So when you get a 3 lecture later, you should save the question, that question. Okay, any other last minute questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for listening.